Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and start. And I know that there are a few more people who will trickle in, but hopefully they will catch the meat of the conversation today. Um, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Essie Emery, and I am with the Global Fund for Community Foundations. I am actually joined by two of my colleagues, Wendy, based in Brussels, and Ashman, based in Uganda. And I'm based in Nigeria. And I think today's conversation is really the look back to the 2023/2024 Shift the Power Fellows. And I would start by saying that for us, the Shift the Power Fellowship idea or model started with really a question. And this was, how can we discuss and reflect around issues of power to create space and intentional space for connecting, for bridging, for bonding, and how can we deepen and expand the movement, the Shift the Power movement, both in terms of social and relational capital, and to strengthen the collective weave between change makers around the world. And so in 2021, the call was relatively simple. We were looking for individuals who were already engaged in immersion practice. So things like testing out what community philanthropy is, or using participatory processes in their day-to-day work, for example, and others who were curious to understand more about what systems change work is all about, and to connect with like-minded peers around the world with whom they may not normally connect with. And so since 2021, 32 fellows later, this is the look back of the second cohort of the Shift the Power Fellowship that began last year in September. For the second cohort, we had 20 fellows from 13 countries. And they have spent the last 10 months really delving deeper into issues around working with marginalized groups, understanding how to advance shift the power principles and values with community and decision making, regenerative care and what collective care looks like. And they've been working with each other and within their organizations as well to sort of unpack and answer some of these questions. In looking at some of the recurring themes from the final reports that the fellows shared a couple of months ago, there are four things for us that stood out. One was the power in community and the Shift the Power global movement. This really was the idea that collective power truly thrives in solidarity, emphasizing the necessity of recognizing and addressing the interconnected struggles in many creative ways that build solidarity across borders. The second theme that came up in their reports was really unpacking new ways of deciding and new ways of working. So this was the idea of shaking off old assumptions and reimagining the new, modeling transformative leadership that truly centers power, distributed leadership, and supporting grassroots leadership, collective efforts in shaping community power. The third theme that came up was around strategies to mitigate against shrinking civic space. And this was really more around growing and building the body of knowledge and evidence on how this type of systems change work actually happens. So the fellows have worked to document the role community foundations can play, for instance, in raising awareness about the importance of community philanthropy, sharing methods that foster collective meaning and sense making, and shifting away from transactional power dynamics. And I think the last thing that came up was really, the fellowship is a light touch approach in terms of supporting change makers wherever they sit. But what came out from the reports was that this was also a space for reflection, or really the power of reflection. So this was a human-centered, our approach was a human-centered approach, really building connections between people and organizations. And it was a flatter model of knowledge building and sharing. And so some of the fellows have talked about how this space really gave them time to reflect and to think more deeply at an individual, group, and community level. It was a space to rethink and reshape political thought on shifting power. It was a space for them to dismantle the ingrained assumptions of the world of development work. And it was also an opportunity to be part of a larger movement, a larger community who were willing to challenge each other, challenge the status quo, and push for change. So how are we going to spend our morning together, the next maybe 90 or so minutes or 80 or so minutes? First, we'll have three fellows from the second cohort talk a little bit about their insights and learnings. I will introduce them in just a minute. And then we'll break out into smaller breakout groups for you to meet the rest of the fellows who are also present in this morning's call. There in the breakout rooms, you can go a little bit deeper into some of the issues that the fellows would have raised in their short presentations. And then we'll come back together in the main room for any final reflections or thoughts from the fellows, and also to answer any questions that you may have. So that's how the morning session today will go. Let me just quickly introduce the speakers, our fellows. So we have first Magda. I don't know if Magda, if you want to wave so that people know who you are. There you are. Magda from PenFund from Poland. She will be speaking on her reflections and her work during the last 9 months on regenerative activism and what collective/community care looks like. Our second speaker is Michael from the Philippines with the Center for Disaster Preparedness Foundation. Michael, could you wave so that people know who you are? There you are. He will be speaking around what locally led, providing locally led examples of measurement and evaluation. And then finally, we have Severus. Severus waves, that people know you. He's the one with the beautiful backgrounds of African baskets behind him. Severus is from Uganda with the Chala Foundation, and he'll be talking about movement building, specifically with marginalized groups. So those are our three speakers this morning, and I will turn it first to Magda, ladies first. Magda, you have the microphone.
Yes, thank you, Essie. Hello, everyone. So again, my name is Magda. I use she, her. Okay. I'm based in Warsaw, Poland, in Central Europe, which is of course part of the continent, but at the same time, it's quite a distinct geography. And I always like to highlight that. And I consider myself a feminist and resource justice activist, and I'm the initiator and the co-founder of the Feminist Fund in Poland. FemFund, it's a shortened version of its name. And this organization is a community-led, power-shifting, trust-based and participatory grant maker supporting feminist organizing in the country, in Poland, since 2018. And it was set up in the context of skyrocketing backlash and backsliding in my country. And I'm really excited that today I can share some of my learnings on regenerative activism, collective care, and healing. But I also need to highlight that these learnings are still a work in progress, and they are definitely open to discussion. And I'm also very curious how they will resonate with your own experiences. And also, just for transparency, these learnings derive from both my personal journey as a change maker engaged in social justice movements, but also from the collective journey of my home organization, Feminist Fund in Poland, the amazing Shift the Power community, the fellowship, and especially from our collective work with Jane and Buki, my fellow colleagues. I think Jane is here today. I'm sure Jane is here. I'm not sure about Buki. Yeah, and specifically this session that we ran at Bogota Summit last year. Um, okay, so why do I want to make the case for centering collective care, healing, and regenerative forms of organizing as part of our political agenda, actually as part of the Shift the Power agenda? For me, it all starts with the realization on how change actually happens, what actually enacts it, and who is paving the way towards greater justice in the world, regardless of whether wherever it is. It might be in Poland, the Philippines, Uganda, Nigeria, or other geographies of the globe. And as we know, in most cases, it's grassroots communities, social justice movements, especially the most oppressed identities and human rights defenders. And it was, of course, also the case in Poland, where impactful and vibrant civil society defended democracy recently and ousted authoritarian forces that basically aimed at dismantling the rule of law and democracy in my country in the past 8 years. But the determination, passion, and energy of the social justice movements are the driving force for change in all burning fields, including climate justice, labor rights, peace, and equality. And this leads us to realization that change makers, people working on the ground, people at the forefront, they are absolutely the most valuable asset. They don't only need to be protected, which is kind of a minimum, but they deserve to be appreciated and cherished. Yet, oftentimes, they operate in hostile contexts, and social justice movements continue to be extremely stretched as they respond to all kinds of crises. And we operate in deepening and interlocking crises of climate catastrophe, rise of authoritarianism, war, political turmoil, anti-rights backlash, decline of democracy, just not to mention, persisting racism, sexism, and homophobia. So fighting for justice in these times of despair is indeed exhausting, and it's no wonder that activists simply burn out, as in many cases they simply compromise their health, their well-being for the cause. But what is for me key to realize that individual burnout doesn't happen in the vacuum. It's not someone's personal failure. It's rather something of systemic nature. It also tells us something important about the culture of organizing in which we participate and which we co-create. This is a symptom. And this culture, it doesn't always allow for prioritizing well-being of activists, as there's always too much to be done, and more injustice is being generated all the time, especially by those who hold formal and informal power, including transnational corporations or national governments. And injustice, in turn, causes trauma, and there's so much unaddressed and unhealed trauma that is perpetuated in ourselves, our communities, and the movements we are part of. So, if our goal is to transform the system so it doesn't serve the few, but rather serves the most of the people, and it doesn't support welfare of only those who are already privileged, but the welfare of everyone, the existing harm and underlying trauma both need to be recognized and healed. It's also important for me to emphasize that facilitating regenerative activism caring for one another and practicing healing isn't something separate or additional to our collective fight for justice. I strongly believe that this is the actual work. This is the body and content of our work. And by centering those, we are already countering capitalistic, exploitative, and extractive logic. And we are already fixing the world and fixing the flawed system. Because it's not only important where are we headed, but also how are we getting there. And in other words, our what and our how, they need to be aligned and become one thing in the end. So rather than an add-on, collective care and healing are an integral part of social justice agenda. And as Audre Lorde, Black feminist, lesbian thinker, my really beloved personality, and I wouldn't be myself if I didn't quote her today. So, as she put it, we can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And for me, this quote calls for transforming our how, our culture of organizing for change. And outer change requires inner change, and change can be practiced and executed here and now in community with others. I also believe this happened within the framework, or is happening within the framework of this Shift the Power Fellowship. And one more learning for me, the last one that I will share today, is that valuing well-being, relationships, and organic processes that sometimes tend to be messy is also a matter of dismantling white supremacy culture, because orienting exclusively towards measurable indicators and numeric progress, or imposing rigid structures on fluid, dynamic, and complex realities, as well as organizing everything in silos, like all of it has serious limitation and is a manifestation of white supremacy culture. So for me, transforming the dominant ways of working in social change sector is also a part of racial justice struggle. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Magda. And you were exactly 10 minutes. I'm really, really impressed. Thank you for that. I think also what I'm taking away from your short talk was that, I mean, it is important to not just care for activists during the change making process, but really at the end as well, right? So we are imagining this new world that is based on equity and justice and love. But we want to arrive there well. We want to arrive to this new world whole and not burnt out and exhausted and angry that we can't really enjoy what it is that we have essentially fought for. So thank you so much for centering this thing, your work around. This is not something that you essentially think about at the end. It should be an integral part of the actual work as we are rebuilding and reimagining and thinking about a new way of working and doing. So thanks for your presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Michael now, all the way from the Philippines. You have 10 minutes, Michael. I know you, I saw that shocked face that Magda set the bar pretty high, exactly 10 minutes. I'm looking for 10 minutes from you, Michael. You have
Yeah,
the microphone now.
thank you, Essie. May I be allowed to share screen?
Yes, can you see it on the share screen at the bottom of your, does it
Yeah,
show up
but
for you? Or,
it's disabled. Maybe you can
okay,
just
yeah, maybe let me just make you
yeah.
co-host so that you can also, you can do that.
Okay, got
Has
it.
that come up for you now? Okay.
Yeah. Um, just okay. Hello, everyone. I am Michael Mercado. You can call me Mike. I'm from Center for Disaster Preparedness in the Philippines, and I'm going to speak about locally led examples of monitoring and evaluation, but really gleaning from our learnings in a grants facility called Abot Kamay Community Solidarity Fund, which we implemented in the Philippines alongside consortium members, Global Giving, Seema is here, hello, Seema, Global Fund for Community Foundation, and nonprofit organization from New York in the US, Nonprofit Finance Fund. And also a lot of learnings as well from Shift to Power and Measuring What Matters, Convening and Meeting. Allow me to start my talk with a video so that I could set the tone of
We've been doing conventional monitoring and evaluation using log frame, using theory of change, all of this focusing on the objectivity of data and the chain of evidence, which has made us think that the hypothesis is development or the impact is a straight line, it's linear.
Measuring what matters and be able to document. The same way we have
Impact is dynamic, and therefore we cannot look at one way of doing things. As much as we have tools for qualitative and quantitative measurement, there is also an aspect of subjectivity that has come in, the contextualization, in order to understand how impact is happening at the community level.
This will strengthen the trust, but it will also make it more acceptable and smooth change.
We discuss about subjectivities, and to what I understand, it's quite, radical, controversial, if you may, because it's very different with the current system. So we hope moving forward we will have equally rich experience to share our learning together so that we become a much stronger community in terms of supporting what could emerge moving forward.
It's not just our purpose, our values, it's also just how we do our work. We need to challenge ourselves to do it differently, and when we do, amazing things happen.
So when people were talking to their context, there was a lot of resonance and there was a lot of understanding, because I think the way we represent Global South, we represent the issues and context and cultures of Global South is critical. And I think that's what stood out for me. And another thing was how you can use open space technology very effectively to be able to bring strangers who've never had a word spoken to each other, bring them together and let them sit in some discomfort of figuring out how do you engage in a space where you don't know whether the way you speak, the way you communicate, the way you frame your ideas is acceptable or not. To be able to lean into that discomfort and be able to understand that, acceptance can be earned and pretty fast if there's trust, in the room. I think that was very strong for me.
And this comes to with the backdrop of shift the power to the community, and it's all about subjectivity, and therefore it has really hit me that we need to look as practitioners and experts. We need to look at the dimension of subjectivity and shifting that power to the community so that they can take charge of their own development and measure their own results. And therefore the discussion of why measurement, measuring what matters, where the community are the ones telling us what to measure.
Shift the power!
We've been doing
Okay, so one of the highlights of our meeting in Bali for the Measuring What Matters is that we do have a theory of change, and we tend to use slug frame in a lot of our projects or proposals that we develop. And these are useful, but we need to look more in the stories, in the experience, lived experience of the community we work with. And that is why it's important to use a methodology or approach where these stories come out. And in the case of the Philippines, at the start of our grants facility, we sort of established that approach. There was this one grantee, an organization that really uses phenomenological approach in surfacing the changes that happen in the communities they serve. They listen, they do community talks, they sponsor storytelling, art galleries, and all these activities that involve a lot of community participation. So it is through these avenues that they are able to really talk about why certain things are working for certain groups or sectors or sections of the community and why it doesn't for others. So it's really about contextualizing and listening to the people in the community. Of course, there's a strength and limitation to this approach, but when you still have, of course, have to look at your quantitative indicators, but as it is an excellent way of capturing human experiences and explaining why certain social changes are happening in the community level. In the experience of Abot-Kamay Community Solidarity Fund, we really emphasized Filipino values and wisdom, and it's also part of decolonization, going back to our roots, challenging the dominant ideology on the aid system, and really focusing on what are the values that Filipinos hold, and what are the principles that are dear to them. And we, of course, learned, and we know that in terms of community philanthropy, it's happening naturally in our communities. People really help each other. It's a very group dynamic culture. Giving is natural, and as compared to the more individualistic dynamics from other cultures. And it also, the spirituality is also there. So if you think about Filipino culture, we regard things that are unseen as sacred. So our environment, the mountains, the rivers, all these things, we think they are also, they also have life. So there's much respect for that. And if you see the problems that we have in terms of climate change, these are because of a culture that is more profit-driven or largely not thinking about all these things, the environment as sacred. And a lot of our community activities, the joy of being together is always important. So sharing food, even art. And so we think that in the way that we sort of implement development initiatives, it is important that it also involves communities in the consultation and how projects are designed or initiatives are designed. And it's also true with the way things or the successes of these initiatives are measured. We really look back, and this was actually the sort of bedrock of the Abot-Kamay Community Solidarity Fund. Is we wanted for the people in the community to have a say on which measures of success or indicators that must be followed in their reports. So we also looked at the factors why they would think that community participation, for example, is an indicator that they must measure. Also, volunteerism is important to them because it gives them meaning and all these stuff. So I've listed actually some of the indicators that they thought that they collectively decided upon in the beginning of the Abbot Kamay Community Solidarity Fund. And it actually is really rooted on the core values of Filipinos. So for example, community participation was the #1 indicator that is important to them, because without community participation, there's not much that could be done, meaning that a lot of the activities that we almost always do in the community involves them to be very active, and without that participation, everything is just, money from development aid agencies. And they also put premium in the commitment of community organizers or leaders of people's organizations, and the influence or because in Philippine society, everything or everyone is equal, meaning that we don't actually, the more that you are, you regard yourself as high or higher than everyone else, people tend to be looking down on you because everyone must be equal in community life and community activity. So these are just some of the indicators that they have mentioned. And I will show, this also shows that a lot of subjectivity and a lot of the way that these could be measured is, through stories, through qualitative data, through listening to them, and a lot of community gathering. So this could be surfaced. So some of the things that we did was that the monitoring and evaluation didn't really look at the sort of value for money as is normally done in any other projects funded by external donors. But we looked at the monitoring and evaluation as a way for them to better their activities or their initiatives or their activities, so that it's more, their programs are more adaptive and flexible, and therefore much more efficient in providing solutions to the issues that they originally was looking to address. And a lot of the organizations that we worked with, they seem to have improved on the way that they synthesize or look at what is more important for the communities, because there was a lot of feedbacking, there was a lot of consultations. Not that they are not doing that originally, but this time it's more intentional in the way that they wanted to hear more from members of the community. So some of the metrics that they've included in the start of the grants facility, it translated at the end of the grants facility as this: community contentment. How contented are the people in the community with how initiatives or activities went, or how successful they were. And they also measured the growth and leadership, not just within their organization, but the empowerment of certain sections in their communities, such as women, persons with disabilities, or youth or children. And of course, you can attach financial figures to all these efforts. And at the end, I will show you how much they were able to sort of raise, given the amount of funds that they got from the grants facility. They also looked at the participation and volunteer devotion, because like they indicated in the indicators, volunteerism is something that is embedded in our culture. And so there were issues, or there were instances in the past where, for example, other development agencies would come in and really just pay for the work that are being done by locals, and that created and caused volunteerism to be it negatively affected that spirit of bayanihan in the communities, where people don't want to work anymore without being paid. And so maintaining that sort of spirit and culture was important for them. Personal stories being listened to was important to them as well. And so the subjectivity in this case, as was also shown in the video, is really important way of measuring or really showing how changes are being done, or why specific successes in your initiatives are must be pursued and must be tweaked, or if there's anything that you could learn from them. Engagement and understanding of community life is very important. And so much of the sharing that we do at the end of initiatives, we do lessons learned workshop, so that they, even after the grants that they receive, could continue to have that space and continue to have that learning and continue on with their community work. Of course, they also still look at the quantitative data. That's important too, but these will have no value if they are not attached to stories or narratives. And so when we looked at the total assets that our partner grantees were able to mobilize, they were able to partner with other sectors, such as the government, other civil society organizations, or assets within the communities, was actually greater than the amount that they received from the Abu Kamay Community Solidarity Fund. And this is actually where the energy of CDP is being put to for the past few months, is how do we really allocate figures to all these community assets that are usually not shown, or not they are not reflected in the ledgers or the reports that we send to donors. Because there, as we know, in the new system, we don't just look at the financial assets. We look at the entire community assets that enable us to get from point A to point B. And I think that's the essence of what I wanted to speak about today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think in listening to you, really, for me, it's the reminder that it's people that we're working with, right? And not to see communities, if we use the traditional method or process of always seeing communities as problems to be solved, then you have a negative and a wrong approach to working with communities, and that people truly are at the center. That's one of sort of our core assets. When we talk about community philanthropy, it begins with people, trust, assets, all the knowledge that are already in communities that are rich in those assets. So thank you so much for your presentation. I loved it. And I think we'll get access to the slides. Can I share
Yes.
that afterwards? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And our last speaker is none other than Severus, based in Uganda. So Severus, you have the microphone to talk about working with marginalized groups and what change looks like with that.
Thank you, Essie. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Once again, my name is Severus. I'm a psychologist and the co-founder and the director of the Tala Foundation that is based in Uganda. I've had the privilege of being a fellow in the Shift the Power Fellowship, where we've explored what it means to build movements, create change from the ground up, and build community. Our work at the Tala Foundation really just focuses on mental health and well-being for LGBT communities across Africa. And we've had the privilege to extend some of our work to West and Eastern Africa. Throughout this fellowship, I have had the chance to reflect deeply on how we can truly shift power into the hands of marginalized groups. And I'd like to share some of those reflections, particularly with LGBT communities, exploring how mental health, community, and audacity are interconnected when we are doing this work. One thing I've reflected on during this fellowship, and that has been evident in my work, is that real power comes from within. And this is where mental health plays a crucial role as a foundation for strengthening movements. When we think about building movements, we often focus on visible aspects like protests, campaigns, and policy changes. But what about the internal work? What role does mental health play in enabling people to stand up, speak up, and lead? At the Tala Foundation, we have seen in our work that when we prioritize mental health, it does have a transformative effect. It goes beyond just reducing distress. It actually helps people reshape how they see themselves and their role in society. Strong mental health does give individuals the confidence to say, I have value, I deserve to be heard. And this is where true power starts to shift from systems of oppression back to the individuals who are most often affected by them. But mental health isn't a one-size-fits-all. So interventions have to be culturally sensitive, they have to be competent, and they have to be contextually relevant. What works in one setting may not work in another. At the Tala Foundation, we've been exploring ways to integrate traditional African healing practices or symbology with modern therapeutic approaches. And one of the ways we have done this is we were able to successfully treat depression amongst LGBT community within a fireplace setting. A fireplace symbolic within different African narratives as a place to convene, as a place to speak, as a place to open up, to share, and a place that is warm. And what this is about is really decolonizing mental health care and making sure it's accessible, relevant, and that it resonates with the communities that we serve. Another core lesson that I reflected upon, or is actually prominent within the Shift the Power movement and fellowship, is the importance of community. Like some of my fellows have touched base on. Yes, it's great to have power within and to use mental health as a foundation to garner that strength, but movements are not built by individuals alone. They're built by communities coming together, finding strength in one another. And in many parts of Africa, LGBT individuals often live in isolation due to continuous persecution, fear, violence, discrimination. But when they do come together, whether it's in a physical safe space or on digital platforms, there is transformation. And we have seen this as is evident in Uganda, where we recently passed the anti-homosexuality law, but the community is still finding ways to survive, is fighting, trying to appeal this law, and continues to march on. So this isolation does turn to so this continuous work within communities does turn into solidarity, and this solidarity fosters strength. Some of the work we have done with regards to community building in the Tala Foundation is creating safe spaces that have allowed LGBT people to connect, to share, to heal within themselves, just like Magda said, to kind of foster community healing. But building community is not just about togetherness. It's also about recognizing and honoring the diversity within the community, and understanding intersectionality has been key to the work that we do. Questions like, how do we ensure that the most marginalized in our groups, like trans women, women, those living in rural areas, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, are not only just included, but are able to lead, so that we're not just tokenizing people, we're actually placing them in situations where they can change the most immediate spheres of their lives that are relevant to them. And this is the power of community in action. And that is where the real change starts to take root. And finally, audacity. Boldness is a crucial ingredient in shifting power. And it's also highlighted in the Shift the Power manifesto. Being audacious means daring to exist loudly in spaces where you're told to be quiet or silenced or threatened. It's about challenging the status quo, even when it's dangerous to do so. But here's the reality. Audacity does come with risks. We've seen this across the continent and in Uganda, where, being a visible LGBT activist comes with threats or violence or worse. So how do we balance this need for bold action with a very real need for safety? One answer is to get creative with how we express our audacity. Digital activism and platforms has taken root, has allowed the community to organize and advocate while minimizing physical risks. And some of this became more, COVID-19, one of the positive things I guess I could say that came from COVID-19 is it really allowed the LGBT communities to rethink what organizing looks like in digital space. And now that these laws are being and now that anti-LGBT laws are being spread across the continent, digital platforms have never been have never played a more important role than they do now, to have cross-border collaborations, to broaden up the community and open it up to greater potential. I have learned that audacity is not just about public demonstrations. It's about finding new ways to challenge power structures, even when you can't do so openly. And that's the kind of creativity that is keeping movements alive and thriving, even in the most hostile environments. Here's a final thought to ponder before we break into smaller rooms. What if shifting power isn't just about changing systems or laws, but also changing how we see ourselves and each other within the systems? Real power comes within, from strong mental health, from communities that support each other and uplift each other, and from the audacity to demand for the change that we seek. I've written a paper that goes deeper into these ideas, how mental health, community building, and audacity all come together. And I hope it sparks some new ideas for you, just as my reflections during this fellowship has done for me. And I'll be excited to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, I can start. This was super brief, and it really led us to conclusion that we need more dedicated spaces to dive deeper, because this theme needs to be explored more. It's still quite a new theme for some of us, and we had a significant diversity in the room of people who were interested in this discussion, and it was a diversity in terms of experience in the area of collective care, but also geographies and identities. So yeah, we had a very interesting composition of the group. So there was no time for conclusions, but we touched upon like the idea that the first step is to be really intentional about bringing this topic forward and creating intentional spaces like today, but also we can do it within our own organization, to start with ourselves and make space for this theme. and in a broader perspective, we also touched a bit upon the donors community, that some of us find it very difficult to fundraise for this work and being intentional about it. And this requires also resources in terms of time, but also monetary resources. So there's still too little understanding, yeah, as we said at the beginning, that this is the body of work. This is not, self-indulgence. This is politics, really. Jane or anyone from my group, please feel free, because I'm sure I didn't capture it. I didn't give it a justice. So please share if you feel like.
No? Okay. Anyone from the measurement group want to say something? Michael? Can I
I
take
think
you?
Alima was discussing something and we got cut off. Maybe she also
Yes.
wants to bring it up to the group.
Sure.
So we were talking about I was saying that so much resonated with what Mike shared, what's happening in the Philippines, with some of the things I've seen elsewhere. But one of the things that struck me was when we were talking about we want to live in a world, we want to live in a system where stories of change are the medium, where there's an acknowledgement that different stories will happen in different places. And I love Mike's analogy with food. What makes your dish flavorful is going to be different in every different place. And that's the future system, the future world. But how do we also operate in that sort of pragmatic world where some funders look to aggregate into some simple stories, things that are happening in lots of places, or simple measurements, things that are happening in lots of places? And how do we operate in this system while still trying to smash it? And yeah, where lots of people are looking to simplify the richness of people's lives and stories into a one-liner.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alima. It's I think just showing up, I think, like Magda said, and just having these practices. And obviously we weren't expecting that we would have the answers to that in this call this morning. But at least surfacing some of these examples and surfacing some of these tools is important. It would take a while to get there. I think we need to know that this is long-term change work or systemic change work that we're doing. It's not something that can be projectized or fit within 12 months or 18 months or whatever. That these types of questions need to keep surfacing. So thank you so much for sharing. Anyone, I'm seeing Sony, I see your camera open. So, and Kushula from your group want to share on what it looked like in decolonizing the world and aid and how that can impact funding practices. I'm sure you came up with amazing answers to that question.
Thank you, Ese. So we actually we actually sort of gave a brief introduction to the context in South Asia, given that Sonia and I are both from the South Asian region, and sort of how you see democratic backsliding, very authoritarian governments, very anti-rights movements coming up, and then funders and especially bilateral, multilateral agencies trying to align their priorities with whichever the government that is in power, and community-based organizations, civil society organizations, because they desperately need funding, trying to fit whatever projects and programs that they can do for their communities within these templates of the bilateral, multilateral YNGOs, funders, and that how difficult it is. And then Yvonne and Mabel, both from the African region, shared the context in their countries and how they see similar trends happening there as well, where you see organizations are forced to do things just so that you fit into the boxes of your funder, even though it does not align or even though it does not further the interest of the community that you are trying to work with, trying to support. And also this is why, and Yvonne from our group actually said, this is why it is so important how we can mobilize locally led aid and not necessarily depend on aid from, the Western countries or, outside external sources that would naturally try to align their interest with whatever the government that is in power. Soni, would you like to add something?
I think, Kaushila, you covered it so well. I just a thought that came to my mind when we were discussing was how, when we are talking about decolonizing the aid system, when we are within the system, it's like very challenging. And will we be able to decolonize when we are within the system? So it's very important to find ways to locally make grants or locally fund ourselves to the work that we want to do so that we do justice to ourselves and the communities we work with.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Soni and Kashala. I really appreciate that. I know I'm conscious of time, so I wanted to go to the last group on working with marginalized groups. I don't know if anyone from that group, perhaps Severus, since you spoke, might want to share. I actually don't see Severus anymore. I know there were some folks who dropped out due to network issues. Oh, he's coming right back in. There he is. I should be coming in soon. But anybody else from that group who was in that group would like me to share something? Hi, Severus. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you. Apologies for that.
I was asking if you wanted to share any just key highlights from your group.
Wendy seemed to think that we should have joined the collective care group because there was some overlapping themes with Magda, and she thought we had curated the content. No. Then lastly, I think Frederick, if you'd like to speak more about your reflections, just so I don't hold up the space. Is Frederick still on the call?
I think he's gone.
No, I don't think he's here.
I just thought there was a lot of links between what Magda was talking about and what Severus was talking about. That was my point. And that they had an alliance between the two of them and they'd coordinated their talks.
Well, there's the background, behind the scenes planning and coordination with that. So that was, I'm glad that came up. So thank you, everyone. I think for me, this has been, I always learn, for me personally anyway, maybe I shouldn't talk about everyone, but for me personally, there's always one or two or three or five things that I always pick up in my learnings whenever we hang out with the fellows. And I hope that was the same for you today. This conversation was more of a teaser, a start. We weren't attempting to answer or solve the problem of a broken system in today's call. But we wanted to use this space as a way to let you know that there is a community of change makers like the fellows who are grappling with some of these questions, who are piloting and testing out and experimenting with some practices. And of course, the Global Fund is here as sort of the shepherd or the behind the scenes sort of creating the spaces and facilitating some of these conversations. Today, we'll be having a second conversation in the afternoon, I guess my time, late night, midnight for some of you, but morning for the other side of the world in Latin America. And that conversation would be with a different set of fellows, three fellows, one from Brazil, another from Zimbabwe, and one from Colombia, talking about what community engagement strategies look like, alternative organizational structures and architecture, because it is these organizations who will be the forefront of doing this. And then what advocacy for enabling frameworks, legal frameworks, registration frameworks for community foundations and philanthropy looks like, particularly in Zimbabwe. So that's the conversation we'll be having this afternoon. That one, because we have both Portuguese and Spanish speakers, it would be translated. So if you are up in this time zone and you want to hear what those fellows are talking about, please join us this afternoon. But otherwise, I hope that our paths cross one way or the other, somewhere online, in our inbox, and of course, you know where to find us. So thank you for spending the last 90 minutes with us, and I wish you a good rest of your day and rest of your week.
Well, Essie, before we leave, we'd
Yes.
thank you so much for shepherding the process. You were so helpful for all, our questions, and for caring for the whole 20 fellows. Thank you so much. And also Wendy and the whole Global Fund communities. Thank you for the opportunity.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
guys.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.